Please welcome Dharmesh Mehta.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Amazon Accelerate 2025. That's right. We've got an amazing, jam-packed agenda for you. And what better way to kick things off than with an exclusive fireside chat this afternoon with Amazon CEO Andy Jassy. Now, Andy is a truly brilliant and inspirational leader who has driven innovation on behalf of customers and sellers at Amazon for over 27 years. He joined us here at Accelerate 4 years ago when we were still fully virtual, and I'm so thrilled to have him back here with us to chat with us about how important all of you, our selling partner community, are to Amazon and the customer experience, and to discuss innovations that help businesses of all sizes succeed. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Andy. Welcome, Andy, and thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here with all of you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's awesome. And so, Andy, you've actually been at Amazon now for almost 3 decades. And back when you joined the company, we were still a books-only online store, and we were just starting to add other product categories. And I'd love to just kind of kick things off with you telling us a little bit about that decision to first welcome independent sellers into the Amazon store nearly 25 years ago.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here with all of you. Our relationship and our partnership with you is so important to us, and so it's a thrill for me to spend a little bit of time with you. In retrospect, I think the way it's worked out, it seems blindingly obvious that it was great for customers for us to build these partnerships, but at the time that we made the decision to open the store to independent sellers, it was quite an animated debate inside of Amazon. And that's because the entire company had been built the first couple of years on the premise of storing items in our own distribution centers and fulfilling them ourselves. And we just weren't sure if we went some other route, what kind of impact would that have on our relationships with publishers and distributors and manufacturers, and could people fulfill items in a way that would satisfy customers the way we thought was required and the brand standards we'd set. But we started seeing these marketplaces like back then Half.com and eBay arise, and we had this debate about whether or not we should open up the store to other sellers. And after a lot of debate, and this took several weeks, we decided that you can't really fight gravity. The reality is that if we had more sellers in the marketplace, there would be better selection for customers and better prices for customers. And the reality is that customers want that. If you look at the cornerstones of a retail experience, there are a lot of things that change, but customers never tire of broader selection, lower prices, and faster delivery. And so we decided that we would do so, and we had some starts and stops along the way. The first thing we tried to do was build an auction site. It was too much of a Me Too, like what eBay had, and that didn't work very well for us. And then we tried something that we called Z-Shops back then, which really was a cul-de-sac on the site where we allowed sellers to sell products, but that didn't work either because nobody went to the cul-de-sac. That's why it was a cul-de-sac. And so it wasn't until we put our independent sellers' products on the same product detail pages as our own first-party selection that customers started interacting more frequently with that selection, and that it became a success for our sellers and for our customers and for us as well. And I think in retrospect, it seemed like an obvious decision. At the time, it wasn't. It's really hard to get a culture to change, and one that was doing well at that time. And then it's hard to execute it well. And I think it turned out to be a good decision for our customers and for independent sellers and for the company. Today, over 60% of our units that we sell are from independent sellers. That's right. And if you look over the last 25 years, about $2.5 trillion of sales has been made by our independent sellers. If you look at the number of employees our independent sellers have employed over that time, it's over 2 million. So together we've created a lot of jobs. And I still think it's quite early in our adventure together.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how we transitioned from just being this first-party retail to really having both our first-party business and independent sellers and how fast they've grown. And one of the elements I've heard you talk about that's been part of that is these building blocks or sometimes primitives that we talk about in Amazon and how critical they are in enabling us to be able to build and scale. And so maybe I'd love to hear from you kind of this idea of primitives and how they've really helped in what we've tried to do for sellers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's another little bit of history at Amazon where because we had built Amazon.com as quickly and as substantially as we did the first several years, we had thought that we had built a bunch of these building block foundational pieces that it would let us scale. These are things like search and browse and item catalog and payments and fraud and things like that. And we kind of went along thinking we'd built this really strong foundation. And then we tried this business called Merchant.com. And what it was really allowing third-party merchants like a Target or a Marks & Spencer to use Amazon's e-commerce technology to fuel their own sites and to deliver those capabilities to those retailers because they wanted all the key building blocks and then they wanted to customize them. And it turned out, and they wanted all those components through application programming interfaces or APIs. And when we went to deliver the pieces to those merchants, it was way harder than we had ever anticipated because we actually hadn't built those capabilities as foundational building blocks. They were really kind of jumbled together as we were moving so quickly, scaling Amazon the first several years. So one of the things we had to go back and do, and it was really painful for us, was we had to go back to all those building blocks and rebuild them as foundational primitives. And around this same time, we were in the process of defining and building Amazon Web Services, which is our cloud computing set of services. And I was part of that team that was working on it at that time. And we were watching what was happening on the Merchant.com side and said, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually build these as separable building blocks that we called primitives. And a primitive service to us is something that does something particularly well. It's a simple thing that does it very well. It's not overly paternal, which means we don't make all the decisions for people that are going to use it, and it has a lot of flexibility. And so in the AWS space, the primitives we built back then was an object storage service, which became S3, and a compute service that became EC2, and a set of database services, a relational database service, and a non-relational database service, and authentication and things like that. And so this concept of building in these low-level primitive building blocks became something that was really at the core. It was a tenet of everything that we went and built. And you can see how we've evolved that here in our retail business. And for our partnership with all of you, we realized that we had so many independent sellers who really found it time-consuming and expensive to have to store their items, to pick, pack, and ship them, and to deliver them to customers. And so that's part of why we built Fulfillment by Amazon, which is a premium service, as you all know, with very fast delivery that's about 70% less than alternatives for a premium service like that. And then we had a number of customers and independent selling partners who said, I have my own websites too, and I really would love the opportunity to let your Prime customers be able to buy using the Prime brand and that fast, the one-click shipping, and then have that fast shipping. And so we built Buy with Prime, which also has been early on something that a lot of our independent selling partners have enjoyed. And if you look just across the board, every time that we build something to scale Amazon, we're trying to build it in such a way where we can turn around and offer it to you. And so, we have a lot of customers who have to take items through the border, so we built a service that makes it easier for you to do that. Then you need freight to get it to various locations. So we've built capabilities that do freight. We have a lot of our independent sellers who want their inventory to be upstream of our fulfillment nodes, and so we've built those upstream warehouses that you can use. We have something called multi-channel fulfillment, which makes it much easier for you to store in one place and ship through, all the marketplaces that you use to ship to customers. That we're able to get items to people 50% more quickly than you can from other retailers. So every time that we can find foundational building blocks that we find help us scale, we're gonna build them so we can scale quicker for you, but then we're gonna also try to turn them around and make them services that you can enjoy that make your business more customer friendly and more cost effective.
That's awesome. And we've talked over the years about a bunch of these supply chain services and how they've been so powerful. Beyond the things we build, I've seen you place a great emphasis on culture. And one of the things you've talked about as part of Amazon's culture is this notion of YQ, and our desire to ask lots of questions about why we're doing something or why we're not doing something and why. And I'd love if you could share with this audience, a little bit about, how do you see what is YQ and why is it so important to our innovative culture?
Yeah. So, I think that Amazon is very much a why culture. And what I mean by that is that it's not top-down driven. It's not my way or the highway. It's not like, the senior person on a team says, this is what we're doing, and everybody says, hub to, and does it. It is a place that from the very beginning, in the 28 years I've been at the company, has always not just encouraged, but expected teammates to ask why. Why are we doing this? Why can't it be better? Why do we have to settle for these constraints? Why must it be done the same way it's been done for the last 20 or 30 years? And, asking those why questions, it can be annoying sometimes for people. You get a lot of people asking why, and the point is not to annoy people, but it's really to get at the root cause of why things have to be the way they are, and to really try to work around the constraints that everybody has accepted for a long period of time, but aren't great for customers. And I think we thought about that, as having a why culture, like there's IQ, there's EQ, this is kind of YQ, and somebody who has good YQ is not just good at asking questions, but asking questions, the right types of questions that get you down to the constraints that help you work around those constraints, and somebody who is not shy about continuing to ask questions when you haven't really gotten to the answer. I mean, there are many times, I'm sure you go through this yourself, Dharmesh, where I feel like I've asked the question four or five different times. I've asked the question, and I'm calculating in my head, and I just say, I don't still understand why we can't do something different than this. And then a lot of people will say, okay, this is too annoying to ask another question. But you have to keep asking questions until you really get to what that root issue is that you can't get through. And then somebody with high YQ also knows when you're at the point of diminishing returns. There are times where you've asked all the questions you can ask, and they're, either you've exhausted what you think you can do to work around those constraints, or there just isn't more to ask, and where you do have to move on and make decisions. And I think that we have this concept inside Amazon of one-way and two-way doors. And the way we think about it is that the overwhelming majority of issues that we all face in our jobs are two-way doors, which means if you make the wrong decision, after you've walked through that door, you can walk back through it and not much harm. And there are a small number of one-way door decisions that you have to make more slowly, more methodical, because if you get it wrong, it's just very difficult to walk back. But both of those ideas of two-way and one-way doors assume that the door is unlocked. And the reality is that when you're inventing, you're often trying to work your way around doors that are locked. And if you have a Y culture and you have high YC, and you ask enough questions the right way with a smart group of people, you have a much better chance of unlocking that door and inventing.
Super interesting. I've certainly heard you ask me why multiple times, and you unearthed some interesting things about assumptions we were making that we don't have to make. It's maybe a great segue to my next question, which, even more broadly, I've heard you talk about wanting Amazon to really operate like the world's largest startup. And I'd love for you to elaborate, when you think about the world's largest startup, what does that mean to you? And how do we help, foster a culture of being the world's largest startup at a place like Amazon? And so that's kind of one question. Maybe I'll tag on a second part, which is, in addition to that, how can the business owners in this room, who are sometimes, small and medium-sized businesses, how can they benefit from that in their own organizations?
Well, everybody has different culture, and everybody may want to operate differently. And but I think for us at Amazon, we have always thought of ourselves as insurgents and as a startup, albeit a large startup, and one that's gotten larger over time. But we aspire to be the world's largest startup, and at our size, it's not simple. You have to be very intentional about it, given the number of employees we have and the number of businesses and geographies that we're in. And I think there are a number of things that are important if you want to try to build an environment that's entrepreneurial like that. I think the first thing is that you have to make sure that you are using technology, not because the technology is cool, but to solve a real customer problem. And we're fortunate, and the technology we work on happens to be very interesting and exciting, but we're not using it for the sake of using it. We are always trying to solve some sort of customer problem. And so I think that's the first thing. Startups are, you can't exist for very long as a startup if you're not solving a customer problem. And as you get larger, it's easy to have lots of groups of people that just fall in love with an idea or technology, and the company's not going to run out of money if they're not actually solving a customer problem, and you have to be religious about that. I think the second thing is who you hire. And we have a culture that's really trying to hire builders. And we think of builders as people who like to invent and people who like to look at a customer experience, even one that's been really good for a long period of time, and dissect it and figure out what's wrong with it and seek to reinvent it. And we try to hire people who meet that type of definition. And then I think you want a culture of high ownership. And I think it's, it can seem like motherhood and apple pie, but as you get larger, you can get a lot of people who feel like, that's good enough, that's not my problem, that's not my area. And I think the canonical example we use a lot is that somebody who's renting an apartment may choose to nail the Christmas tree into the wood floor. But if you own that apartment or that building, you would never nail a Christmas tree into your wood floor. And so you want people who really think like owners, who don't just do their job, but are thinking end to end, am I going to get this done? What's not getting done, and how do I not rest until I make sure that either a teammate or I take care of this? And it's part of why, if you've seen, we're working hard to try to flatten our organization and have fewer layers, because in the very earliest days of Amazon, it's been true for many years, we had very high ownership at every level of the organization, including on the front line. And you want people, if you end up, as you get bigger, with lots of layers, then you end up with pre-meetings for the meeting, and you end up people not making recommendations because they know the decision is going to be made at a higher level, and you end up pretty quickly with people not having ownership. And we want all of our teammates to feel high ownership, and that's part of why we're working on flattening the organization. I think you can't actually operate like a startup if you don't move quickly. And I think that speed is disproportionately important in every business at every stage. And I would say that I have the opportunity to meet with lots of different customers and companies in the various businesses we're in. And sometimes I run into really smart people who say to me, you don't understand, we can't move fast. We've got security issues, we've got compliance issues, we have a lot of people. It just, it can't happen. And the reality is that speed is very much a leadership decision. I mean, you can't wake up one day and decide you're going to move fast and have the organization move fast. But if it's a priority to you and your leadership team to move quickly, you can make that happen. There are a lot of choices you can make in how you organize, how you set up, the expectations you set, what mechanisms you use to move more quickly. And I think that if you want to move quickly, and in most industries that are competitive, you do have to move quickly. That is an important part of being a startup. And I think just related, you have to look in your own organizations and ask yourself, do I have bureaucracy that I want to root out? Because I would say that bureaucracy is really anathema to startups and to entrepreneurial organizations. And as you get larger, it's really easy to accumulate bureaucracy, and a lot of bureaucracy that you may not see. We did something about a year ago where we started this no bureaucracy email alias, where we said anybody who thinks we're doing something bureaucratic, and process does not equal bureaucracy, but something that's bad process, we'll read it and we'll action it. And we've gotten about 1,500 emails over the year or so. And some of the emails are, I don't like this manager, and it's not really bureaucracy, but there are many of them that really are processes that we looked at and said, why are we doing this? This is bureaucratic, or this is too heavyweight. And we've changed about 450 to 500 processes in the last year from that. But no person at any organization wants bureaucracy, and if you want to move fast, you have to root that out. And then I'd just say the other couple things is you have to be willing, you have to be scrappy, and as when you're a really small business, it's easier to be scrappy in many ways because you just don't have the funds to have too many people. But as you have some success, it's easy for teams to tell you, to get this started, I need 25 people, or I need 30, I need, a lot more people than what you got started with. And you have to keep remembering your roots and how useful it is to be scrappy and to learn your way into building a larger team. And then you do have to be comfortable with failure, and taking risks. And if you are going to move quickly, and you're going to be entrepreneurial, you can't control everything, and you are going to make mistakes, and you are going to have failures, and you have to be willing to take risks to have meaningful returns. And those, to me, are all components of really trying to operate like the world's largest startups. And each of you have your own businesses of differing sizes and different stages right now. And you may have other things that you would add to that list, but my guess is at least several of those may be applicable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've somehow made it multiple questions in without saying the two-letter word that's on a lot of people's mind these days, which is just AI. Is such a huge topic. And I don't think it'd be appropriate to leave this conversation without talking about AI and how Amazon's thinking about AI and how you think AI can help sellers grow their businesses.
Yeah. If your mission is to make customers' lives easier and better every day, which is ours across all our businesses, and if you believe that AI is going to be the most transformative technology of our lifetime, which I also believe, then you can't help but to invest really substantially in AI, which is what we're doing. And you can see that in all sorts of areas. If you look at, you can see it in our infrastructure that we're building in AWS, where we're building custom silicon to give you better price performance on training and inference in AI. We have all sorts of services that make it easier for customers to build models and to do inference. We have all sorts of agents that do transformations for customers and coding and things like that. So we have a very big investment on the AWS side to make it easier both for our external builders and our internal builders inside the company to build AI much more quickly. And then you can see it all across our consumer businesses, whether it's our shopping assistant in Rufus, or the capabilities we provide in our apparel business, where we have a big model that looks at the relative size fits of all the apparel brands, and then automatically recommends for our customers what the right fit would be for them for each brand. You can see it in what we do in our fulfillment network, where we use it to do inventory predictions and forecasting, which has made a big difference in how efficient we are. And you can see it in what we're trying to do in our offerings and our capabilities with all of you. And you look at features and capabilities like Seller Assistant, that which we used to call Project Amelia, which makes it easier for you to ask all sorts of questions about the best way to sell on the platform, to things like our bulk AI listings features, which make it much easier to get your entire catalog onto Amazon. If you haven't used it yet, I really encourage you to do so. It makes it much easier. To enhance my listings, which makes it much easier for you to be able to evolve all of your listings and provide better content. To AI-generated A+ content, which makes it much easier for sellers to have great detail pages with great content. To our video generator, which makes it much simpler to create video assets around your products. Those are some of a significant set of AI features that are all geared towards making it easier for you to spend less time on a lot of the manual parts of getting your listings and your products up on Amazon, and also doing what we all know matters to customers, which is providing them some sort of organized coherence to how they can find various items. And so this is kind of the initial set, that plus some others that I didn't mention, but we're not close to being done. Giving you additional tools. And I would just also say, if there are real problems that bother you, make sure you share them with the team, obviously in the next couple of days, but don't limit it to the next couple of days, because the needs and the technology is very dynamic.
And we're actually going to spend a bunch of time tomorrow morning talking about even more AI innovation that's coming for sellers. It's super exciting. Let me go back to, one of the things you mentioned earlier was the importance of speed and what we're doing from a fulfillment perspective. And we've recently made a number of announcements around what we're doing with both rural communities as well as kind of same-day delivery. And I think it's super exciting, not only for what it does for customers, but in terms of what it can do for our selling partners. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what's driven this investment, that many others aren't making.
Well, I think if you look at rural areas of the U.S. and frankly around the world, when people talk about a digital divide, you can really see it there. There are 500 million households around the world that don't have broadband connectivity, and it's part of what our Project Kuiper is about, where we're building a low Earth orbit satellite to provide people in areas that don't have that connectivity access to a lot of things that we take for granted, like doing education online or business online or shopping or entertainment. And so, and I think the same is true for the items that they can receive from e-commerce providers. And, if you look at, just think about, it's sometimes hard to remember, but just 3 years ago or so, the overwhelming majority of Prime items were delivered by and large to people in metropolitan areas in about 2 days. Today, that is much more like a day or less. But those are in metropolitan areas. If you live in a rural area where we don't have a fulfillment center close to you or delivery stations close to you and therefore last mile transportation close to you, you're not getting them in the same time frame as most Prime members. And we know that rural customers obviously want those same. It's not like if you live in an area outside metropolitan area, you prefer to have your items get there slower. And so we have, in a time where you see most of the big logistics providers and frankly telecom providers back away from rural neighborhoods because it's more expensive to service them, we have gone the opposite way and leaned into investing in customers in rural areas. And so we announced about a $4 billion investment in delivering delivery stations closer to customers in those rural areas, and then last mile transportation there. We're in the process of building that, but even in the last 4 months, about 60% more of our customers in rural areas are getting items within 1 day delivery, 1 to 2 day delivery, which is a pretty dramatic change from where things have been. And we're not done building that out. So I think, I do believe it's great for those consumers. I think it's great for this group because what we see over and over again, and we run tests all the time about this, is that when we're able to offer our consumers faster delivery times, even by a few hours, but particularly if you talk about a day or 2 days or 3 days, it makes a massive difference in their likelihood to buy. And what you find is when you're able to deliver more quickly, consumers consider you for a lot more purchases. And when they think about something they want to buy, they end up starting with you more. And so it's great for this group of people as well.
All right, well, maybe one final question, which is just independent sellers play such a huge role in Amazon's store. And I'd love to hear from you, just kind of how do you think about that role of independent sellers at Amazon?
Well, as I opened with, I think that, for us, consumers and sellers are at the very top of the list of customers that we try to make their lives better every day. And so I think that the partnership that we have and the work we're doing together, it's wildly important and strategic to all of us and to me. And I would say that I think our collaboration is probably the most compelling and substantial collaboration in the history of retail. If you think about the union of all the independent sellers and Amazon and all the consumers that we have, what we've made possible for consumers, the selection they have, the low prices they have, the delivery speed that they have, there's really been nothing like it. And I think also the number of if you just the average seller in our marketplace, I think grosses over $295,000 in annual sales, and we have 55,000 sellers who gross over $1 million of annual sales. I mean, these are the way that we have built experiences for consumers and then enabled lots of businesses together to have much larger or more meaningful businesses than otherwise would be the case is pretty unusual. And there are all sorts of examples, but I'll cite one of them, which I'm going to have the luck of getting a chance to meet this entrepreneur. But Lily's in Charleston, South Carolina. So Tracy Richardson, inspired by her dad and her Aunt Lily, built a business making spices and sauces, and they started with a small store. And it was inspired, by the Gullah culture, which is kind of the people and culture in the regional areas of South Carolina and Georgia and in the kind of that nearby Sea Islands. And they started in a small store, and then started providing their products to small markets and groceries. But then during the pandemic, and this happened a lot during the pandemic, it just changed the way we all thought about our lives and we all thought about our work. And not to mention the fact that for about 9 months to a year, everything was shut down. And so Liz went all in on selling in the marketplace. And since that time, their sales have increased 156%. And it just, selling more broadly on Amazon, instead of having to find a way to somehow be able to spend, a ginormous amount of money on advertising and then hoping you could attract them to your store, your storefront, they get to use Amazon as their marketing tool and their focus groups and, national distribution. And, I think it's really meaningfully changed what that business has become and what it has a chance to become over time. And that's one of many stories and examples that exist here. I think what we're doing together is very unusual. I think it's the technology that transformation that we're seeing with AI is going to make it even easier and more compelling for you all to be able to sell and for us to collectively be successful together. And I'm really appreciative that we're on this adventure together. I still think it's very early days.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andy, for your inspiring words and what it truly has been over many years, your unwavering support for our selling partner community. We really appreciate you being able to be here to help us kick off Accelerate 2025. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. We have a lot in store over the next few days. And I look forward to seeing all of you at the welcome reception tonight and then back here tomorrow morning for our first general session. Awesome. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.